Greetings to my distance longboarding friends. I'd rather be outside riding today, but it's cold and gray and windy, and it's one of those April days that it's just hard to get motivated to ride. And last week I went for a long ride on a Sunday that was very similar in weather to this, and I'm just not frankly ready psychologically to get back out there. So instead, I'll talk about a topic that is pretty boring, but I think important, and that is truck maintenance, and specifically changing bushings and kingpins. And I've got my MK Space truck out, and originally I thought I would do a review of this truck, as I've had it for almost a year now. Can't remember exactly when I got it, but I thought it was sometime mid to late spring last year. Um, and But I think it deserves its own video because I tend to ramble, as you know by now, and I'm just not going to be able to touch on everything I want to touch on today. So I'm going to talk about truck maintenance in general, how to change a kingpin and bushings, and why to do so. Just for background, and I may repeat myself from earlier videos, I started riding in about 2008 or 2009, back at a time when there really were no precision trucks for distance longboarding. So I learned on Bennett truck front and tracker rears, and there really were no off the shelf bushings for the Bennett that were usable. It obviously came with bushings, but they weren't good for pumping. And so we used a lot of Kiro bushing combinations, stacked bushings, one on top of one another, or a cut bushing stacked on another bushing. And there was definitely an art to that. And I found it was unpredictable as far as longevity, how long those bushing combinations would kind of work in synergy before something would slide a little bit, or one of those white Kiro bushings would smush a bit. And it didn't have the same ride characteristics. And if you had a friend that had a particular setup and you tried to emulate it was never quite the same. And frankly, that's one reason why I think I got a little bit frustrated with the sport back in 2009 or 10. Shortly after I started, I moved on to cycling and swimming, partly because I saw communities there, and I didn't feel a local community with longboarding. And the internet, there was plenty of information on Paved Wave in particular, on the internet, but I wasn't part of Facebook. No Facebook groups or Instagram, or ways to sort of see what people were up to in other parts of the country and the world. And so I sort of fell out of away from longboarding. But the other reason that I think I was turned off a bit was I had a couple of kingpin failures on those Bennett trucks. And for me, when I have had a kingpin failure, it tends to be a very sudden, violent event that always ends in at least minor injury. I have seen and read about people having kingpin breakage and still finish their ride somehow, or maybe hear a little something and stepped off their board and see a crack. But it wasn't a catastrophic event. And for me, it's always been a catastrophic event. And maybe that's due more to pumping. I do think there's a difference between the stresses of pumping and straight pushing. And if it's a spectrum, pushing versus pumping, I'm certainly more on the pumping end of the spectrum. At least I was back at the time when I had trouble with those Bennett trucks. So I would tend to fall violently and didn't know what had happened until I felt sort of the bottom drop out under my front foot, and I found myself having hit my head and had abrasions on my left shoulder, hip, and hand from where I'd fallen. And that's usually my falling pattern with pumping. And I did that maybe one too many times, and then I sort of moved on to cycling and other things. And I didn't pick up longboarding again till about 2017, when some local friends and I sort of discovered surf skating and kind of came back around to distance longboarding indirectly through surf skating. And then I found precision trucks and sort of haven't looked back since then. Um, so when I think about truck maintenance, I'm approaching it from the standpoint of somebody who pumps a lot, who has had some violent falls, and is not really a gearhead, despite all the gear that I do own. I don't mind doing maintenance. I don't really enjoy it. I'm not a neat freak by any means. I have stacks of boards sometimes sitting in my van for far too long, rubbing against each other, and I'm sure that would give people with gear OCD a bit of frustrating uh, opinion of me. But I do, accept that, maintenance is an important part of preventing injury for me. And so that's why I do it. I don't think there's any great consensus on how often to change a kingpin or bushings. Bushings to me are secondary in the sense that I don't worry about injury risk from a bushing wearing out. So I think it's probably a gradual process with loss of elasticity and performance. But I don't worry too much about when to change the bushing. Certainly, if I see any wear or tear, or I feel like I just want a little increase in performance, whether that's super tentorial or an actual performance of the material, who's to say? But kingpins, I don't want to have another kingpin failure, and I'm sure it'll happen. It's just a matter of time, but I want to try to take steps to minimize it. So I've taken the approach to change the kingpin at least once a year. Um, this particular truck, so I've had it a little less than a year. I changed the bushings once. I had not changed the kingpin yet, so I'm going to do that today. And kingpins are relatively cheap. I just ordered about 15 of them online for this particular truck, and I've ordered some for my Don't Trip trucks directly from Don't Trip. They're usually only, $1.50, $2 a piece, maybe maybe a few dollars after shipping. I'll round up to say it's like a $4 item, which is very cheap insurance if it prevents injury. Now I don't know. Maybe you're better off sticking with a kingpin that served you well for a year and hasn't failed you versus trying a new one that may not be up to specification. But I tend to think it's better to err on the side of replacing regularly. So that's what I'm going to do. This truck, one thing that's great about it is the ease of maintenance. So I've loosened the top nut. It comes apart very easily. The bushings don't need to be recessed. So there's nothing to, I'm not going to find any uneven wear there from where you might have to recess a bushing for, say, the, spherical without the spacer. So these have this 4 millimeter spacer in place. And the kingpin uh, is a very nice fit in this particular kingpin and truck. Slides right out. I didn't need a hammer. I didn't need a hair dryer. Bottom bushing comes out. And so these bushings I did replace recently enough that I'm not going to replace them today. They look like they've still got a little bit of life in them. The hanger pops out of the base plate, has a spherical in the bottom. I will say I wasn't able to film it, but I did use a hair dryer earlier today to heat up the base plate slightly because I was having difficulty disconnecting the stainless steel pivot from the pivot spherical. And it made a very satisfying pop when it came out, and now I can't replicate that. So I took it out, I cleaned it, I put a drop of speed lube in there from, I don't, probably in the embarrassing number of years old, that bottle of speed cream. So there it is. Everything looked pretty good. I cleaned it a little bit earlier. I have taken the spacers off to inspect the hanger spherical. I could do that now. Maybe I'll clean it a little bit. So I think it's a good idea to take your truck apart once in a while and look at everything. Make sure you don't see any obvious damage. I'm not one to take my gear apart. I see some really cool photos online of people that take their whole longboard apart you know, soup to nuts, and everything, it looks clean and laid out in a way that someone with OCD could only blush. And that's not me. I'll never be able to do that. But I do think it's important just to look at your gear once in a while to clean it, just so you get some debris out of areas that can get dirty. Just make sure everything's in good working order. So the truck looks great. I don't see any wear. Someone asked me online about wear on the spacers. I really don't see anything. I mean, maybe a little bit of abrasion on them or indent. You can see an outline of where the bushing lies, but really nothing that should impair performance. And I believe those are probably a wear item and replaceable if you really needed to. But I think they'll last for a while. And then I like to look at the kingpin, see if there's any signs of stress. I certainly don't feel any indentation. And you can see, though, where a couple areas, one where the pin goes base plate, you can see a line there, and then you can see a line where the spherical in the hanger would sit right on the kingpin, and that's probably a stress area. There's a line right here that I can see that kind of corresponds to that area. So anyway, the kingpin is intact. I have a new one. It slides in very easily, just like so. I put in my fat cone, slide it through, line it up on the base plate, it slides right in. Regular barrel. I think that's a regular barrel. Washer, boom, nut. That's as easy as it gets. The only point of reference I have, I've worked with those Bennett's years ago. I have about 6 don't trip trucks. 4 of them are Slalosibans that are slightly more complicated because they have an adjustable base angle. But they're very similar overall as far as, a single kingpin truck with the spherical bearing in the hanger. The one thing I'll say about don't trip trucks is that the kingpin fit is much more snug in the base plate. I suppose that could be good or bad depending on how much play you have with the kingpin. These MK space trucks, they have maybe potential for more kingpin play. Just my suspicion is that the don't trip kingpin hole might be slightly smaller. So maybe it's just tighter as far as the kingpin fit goes. From an ease of maintenance standpoint, this is like the easiest truck I've worked on. And I've had to use hammers and heat guns or not heat gun, hair dryer to get those don't trip kingpins to budge. So that's a pain point for me, but functionally, those are still great trucks. But that's it. That's me changing the kingpin. I think that's $4 or so well spent after shipping cost and maybe having to go through a couple kingpins to make sure you get a tight fit, because I don't think every kingpin fits with precision in the base plate on this particular truck. And that's it. I'll probably change the bushings in another couple months. But to me, a bushing is not a safety risk. They tend to, fail slowly, and at most it might get a little tearing, typically from where might pinch a little bit with the spherical. From a maintenance standpoint, it's really nice not to have to deal with recessing the bushing with this particular truck due to those spacers that the space truck uses. I'm curious, though, from the community, how often you change your bushings, how often you change your kingpin. Do you ever change your kingpin? Do you wait for it to break? Do you worry about your kingpin breaking? Have you had any sort of severe injuries from that? Those are important things that I'm curious about. I don't think there's going to ever be great data on how frequently one should change the kingpin. To me, it's not going to be something that I want to do every 100 or 200 or 300 miles, but maybe every couple of thousand miles or maybe once a year. And maybe that depends on how much pumping you do. I for sure think it depends a bit on how much pumping you do versus pushing, but also how forceful of a pumper are you? Are you a very narrow wiggle pumper, or are you someone that likes to throw your body weight into it and really get it moving with pretty powerful pumps? Um, I think those are all things worth thinking about, but I want to hear your thoughts, so please leave them below. Look for an upcoming video on a review on the MK space truck. But as I said, I didn't want to shortchange that. I think it's a truck that deserves its own review, and I thought it might be instructive just to talk more generally about truck maintenance. Thanks for your time, and hope you're having better weather than I am today. Uh, See you out there skating.